Hello, everybody. Peter Maravellis here on behalf of City Lights Booksellers and Publishers. I'd like to welcome you to a special edition of City Lights Live. We are happy to have with us today Ian Brennan. We'll be exploring the subject of his new book titled Muse-Sick, a music manifesto in 59 notes. It is published by our friends over at PM Press and has a wonderful foreword by the filmmaker John Waters. Mr. Brennan is a world-renowned and award-winning music producer, activist, writer, and cultural critic. He has worked with a wide range of artists from Jack Elliott and Peter Case to bands like Fugazi and Wilco, all the way through to the Blind Boys of Alabama. Although he's received accolades for his work from the music industrial complex, he has been one of their most vocal critics, citing the lack of diversity and homogenization prevalent in the trade. This has led him to championing lesser heard and often underrepresented voices from around the world. His travels have taken him to places like Rwanda, Malawi, South Sudan, Cambodia, Tanzania, and Vietnam, just to name a few. He has engaged in some amazing and very rich work. His collaborations have included such artists as the Malawi Mouse Boys, The Good Ones, Ustad Sami, the Tanzania Albinism Collective, the Sheltered Workshop Singers, and the development of the Zomba Prison Project, amongst others. Ian has been a tireless activist working towards bringing to light some of the most unique and remarkable music the world has ever heard, yet, due to the failure and nepotism of the music industry, has remained hidden from view until very recently. Ian has written extensively about this. His writing has appeared in such publications as the UK Guardian, Bomb Magazine, No Depression, Sound on Sound, Guitar Player, amongst many others. Ian is also the author of numerous books. His trilogy of books about music include How Music Dies or Lives, Field Recording and the Battle for Democracy in the Arts, and Silenced by Sound, The Music Meritocracy Myth. The book we are celebrating today completes this trilogy. Muse-Sick acts as a kind of manifesto that brings together some of the key points in Ian's thinking about music, creativity, the effects of commercialization on human experience, and how we can encourage more organic and community-based expressions of creativity. So it is such a pleasure to have you back with us, albeit virtually, but great nonetheless. I'd like to begin by congratulating you on this amazing tome, seemingly very simple, straightforward, brief, but yet at the same time, very layered with issues and complexity mirroring that of our life in these times. I mean, you really cut through to the heart of some very, very important issues.
Thank you.
So I'd like to begin by thinking about how in contemporary society, subcultures that generate art and music begin with very organic expressions of creativity, but it isn't long before they tend to become co-opted by consumer culture. They become diluted, stripped of their essence, that is to say, the emotions that originally informed them. I'd like to begin our talk with your thoughts about that process.
Yeah, I mean, I think corporations and capitalism is so good at taking the surfaces and emptying them of the content. So we see a lot of punk rock haircuts today on bands that are playing the blandest, most saccharine music you could make, and auto-tuned and on a grid and predictable and stock phrases that have been recycled through pop music for decades, if not longer. So I think that, you know, usually we have in most cultural movements, you have the pioneers, the explorers, then you have the settlers, and then you have the gentrifiers. And it doesn't take long before, you know, most genres become just that. They become codified, and the pioneers would probably not even be playing that music any longer, meaning, would Jimi Hendrix be playing guitar today or music at all? Would John Coltrane be playing saxophone today or jazz? It's questionable. Whether he was born today or whether, you know, their lives have continued on. So I think that there's, you know, this tendency for things to be corrupted by money, and that's the real danger. And yet it's very self-defeating ultimately, because if you look at the history of popular music, almost every major musical form, and there were so many, and it was so revolutionary throughout the 20th century, they were supported and born on independent labels. And so what do we have now? We have 75% of the music in the world, more than that, recorded music being distributed by 3 major corporations. And yet almost every musical form you can name, there's an indie or many indie labels behind it, from, from rock to bluegrass to blues to jazz to, whether it's Impulse, whether it's, Sun, whether it's, Sugar Hill for rap, dance and house music, same thing. It continues on. And so it's scary. It's scary to see that the indie labels have a harder time than ever existing, because they're the ones that bring us the change and the newness and the creativity, really, that breaks the mold.
Yeah. At one point in your manifesto, you mentioned the problem with fretted instruments, which I think is essentially the problem with dualism, either or, right or wrong. I mean, it struck me that this is also something that has now become really tyrannical about the internet. That's to say, our obsession with the like or unlike. I mean, it's kind of a very Roman arena kind of thinking. Do we throw the Christians to the lions? Do we defund the artist or give them a MacArthur grant? Would you address the problem with dualism in its relation to creativity?
Yeah, I think as you pointed out so astutely, it's that binary equations are a problem. They rarely represent reality. They lead to depression, they lead to argument, and they lead to ultimately aggression. And we want to be on the continuum, but the continuum is kind of painful because there's a lot of uncertainty, and people don't like that. It makes them uncomfortable, and they want things that are safe. And so with music, it began with the musical notation that fixed music into place. That was the first recording, and it made certain people literate, a very small group, and everyone else illiterate, and started to divide people as if some are not musical. Everybody's musical. Everybody's on the continuum. There's no doubt that somebody like Prince is way at the far end of that continuum, ahead of almost anybody. But everybody has music in them, and that should be shared, and that should be celebrated. And this began the division between the audience and the performer, and then you have to pay to receive or participate in music as a passive recipient at specified times, starting at this hour and ending at that hour. And so with fretted instruments, it's very similar, and you see people doing what they can to transcend that. I mean, that's what a slide guitar is. You're transcending the frets. You're literally floating right over them with a beer bottle. You see people doing that by bending notes on a guitar, or trying to hammer notes so hard that they go flat or sharp on a piano. But I use the example sometimes of Ustad Sami from Pakistan, who I work with, who's 77 years old. He's the master of a 49 note microtonal system. So that's 49 notes compared to our 5, 7, or 12 scale system. But he's very consciously trying to act as an antidote to duality and trying to make sense of it. And he's trying to be inclusive and diverse in very specific ways, not in marketing ways. Very literally, he's trying to take the tones that people have denied or have labeled as bad and say, no, these aren't bad. These aren't bad. These are musical. And let's bring these back home, and let's bring them and to celebrate the entire spectrum of sound. And to see him do that, it's inarguably true that when he sings, there are no bad notes, but he's singing between the notes that are usually the ones that are allowed to be called musical.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've noticed about some of my favorite musicians, ones that really show exceptional abilities, they all seem to have something in common. They appear to be creating in the spirit of play. And capitalism has segregated play from the rest of our lives. Would you talk about the reasoning behind that, and also the consequences?
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, capitalism wants us to have this divorce from daily life, so that they then can make that in almost every experience one that has to be paid for and that has some kind of monetary value. Yet the best musical experiences are oftentimes the accidental ones. And I think some of the best music made is the music that's made between people that love each other, whether that's sexually relating, or whether that's a mother or father to the child. that's music. And that's really, in many ways, that's the primal song right there. And so when people begin to feel like they're tone deaf, well, there's no such thing. People can't, and if they're able to speak, they're not tone deaf. Because it's not just Mandarin that's a tone language. I mean, it is a tone language, but every language has tone embedded in it. Every language requires the use of rhythm. And so everybody is singing when they speak. So if they can speak, they can sing. I mean, that's a cliche, but it's actually true. And so the other thing I think what you're saying is so true about this sense of play. But another thing I've noticed about extraordinary artists that are at that far end of the spectrum in terms of ability and the continuum is that they're usually incredibly generous. They're incredibly generous individuals. They have huge ears, maybe too huge. Like they're not the best judge of music necessarily, right? Because they like everything. Like they're like they can see the good, and so. But there's such a willingness to contribute something musically when offered, and I think that's what begins to happen again with corporations is people get a hold of them, the handlers, and they kind of rein them in, like, oh no, if it was up to them, they'd be playing for free every night and collaborating with everybody who asked, and they start putting up those blockades. And so my question has always been like, yeah, but I wonder, the artist gets so insulated, but I wonder what they would think or feel if they knew that, and they probably don't. And then a lot of the experiences they're being denied, how those might actually feed them and benefit them artistically. And instead you see that they kind of shrink artistically. And it's like, I think that's one of the contributing factors, is if you've got a team of 7 or 8 lawyers stopping people from even giving them a CD, because they're afraid that person's then going to sue them. It's like, well, maybe that exchange would have been good for them, and they could spare $1 million or 2 anyway. So, is it really that big of a concern? I don't know.
Yeah. Thinking about all this, it seems that the connecting thread between many of the issues that you're discussing in your manifestos is the very way in which we listen. So would you talk about the importance of how we listen and how listening has kind of changed in the last century? And I'm glad you brought up autotune in music production, and because I find that very problematic, because I think that imperfection and accidents, have a really important role in kind of the free flow expression of creativity.
Yeah, and science too. I mean, accidents and mistakes are where some of the greatest discoveries are made. But yeah, I think what are called the mistakes is usually where the humanity lies. The flat notes, the sharp notes, the irregular rhythms. Obviously not in an erratic way, in a way that is coming from the emotion and that's spontaneous and intuitive. But most of the great singers, that's the thing, is that they're Willie Nelson is speeding up and slowing down all the time, and Frank Sinatra was constantly back behind the beat and playing with that. And so, these are singers that kind of transcend time because and you hear them and you kind of know instantly who they are because of their mistakes. Ultimately, I mean, they might be deliberate or unconscious, but nonetheless something intentional. And so auto-tune, what it does is it puts everything on this grid of right and wrong, and so literally a lot of modern singers, we don't know what they sound like. We have no idea. I mean, we know what their engineer makes them sound like. We know that they have a sound, overly compressed, reverb, auto-tune. But the thing about auto-tune, I think that's dangerous is some people will say, oh yeah, but auto-tune's being used in the same way that Ustad Sami uses auto-tune. They're exploring the microtones. Yeah, but they're not able to manufacture that or to apply that themselves, and that's fine. But the dangerous thing is the stuff people don't know is even there, which just takes things and straightens them out, and they get so used to listening to things that don't reflect reality. And I think we get the same thing with movie, folly, is that people are listening to these sounds that don't reflect reality. And any Foley artist will tell you that if the sound as it is oftentimes will not be believed. So in other words, rain doesn't sound like rain, so you've got to create it some other way. A gunshot doesn't sound strong enough, so it becomes, and that doesn't reflect a lot of people's experience in if they ever were, unfortunate enough to be in the presence of a gunfire. So, this is something that we see so much, is that the mistakes are denied rather than celebrated, and the correctional tools not only do they set a low bar, but also that they make everything stock and standardized in the same way that fretted instruments do. And instruments themselves, I mean, with the Comorian group that I work with from the Comoros Islands, the duo, they're both instrument builders, and Subi, who's kind of the mentor for young musicians, he was lamenting that the younger musicians don't want to make instruments anymore. And for him, that's such a big part of it, because literally everyone has their own instrument, their own sound, because of the instrument they built. And yeah, a lot of them are playing the same instrument, but they each have their own. They're not going to, Guitar Center and buying the same guitar that was made in Japan that you can go and buy in France, and you can go and buy in Mexico, and you can mail order over the internet, and that sound is part of their expression. And with the Malawi Mouse Boys, they build their own instruments, and they were kind of ashamed of them, but there came a point where they realized, after we were able to give them some of the guitars and basses and things they wanted, they came back to their instruments and realized, no, this is a strength. This is not a weakness. This is a sound. And the sound of that same 4-string guitar that they built when they were teenagers, and that's on every record that we've done over the last 10 years. If you hear that sound, it doesn't sound like anything else. And if you know that sound within 1 or 2 notes, it's like, oh, that's that guitar. That's that guitar. You can't recreate that.
Yeah. You've done a lot of traveling, and I have to ask, in your travels, because I'm sure you've been to some places where the reality that we're accustomed to in cities is very, very different from those realities. And I'm glad you mentioned time. Time just travels differently in these places. Could you maybe share some of the stories or some of your experiences, things that affected you, things that influenced you, that maybe touched you to your core during your travels in some of these, out of the, norm type of places?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like so spoiled and such a beneficiary of the generosity of so many people and having these experiences. And I think that the education is largely a cumulative one. Just seeing the patterns and seeing the commonality in with humanity, and mostly seeing how peaceful and loving most people are everywhere in the world. No matter where you go. We've spent a lot of time in war-torn countries that were sometimes at war when we were there, and you'd never know it. I mean, if you're not in the area where the war is raging, you don't know that. If you're in most of Kosovo, you don't realize that there's still a conflict to the north. If you're, in South Sudan, you're not, there's certain level of chaos, but you're not experiencing a lot of it directly. But for me, I think what it's done largely is it's really made corporeal, made concrete the inequality, and it's really something that it becomes harder, not easier, with each passing day, with each passing year, is to think about these folks, like the good ones in Rwanda that we've had a relationship with for 13 years, and their families, and seeing their kids be born, and now Janvier is a grandchild, and to know what the struggles that they have, and the utility of a single dollar for them, the utility of $5. It puts a strong face on consumerism. And it's not that I look down on anybody in the US or elsewhere for the system that we are living within or someone else is living within, but it does really resonate that $5 right there would feed their family for a week, and to see that wasted is it's not kind of like liberal kind of crying over spilled milk. I mean, it's really just saying that we've got to find a better way. We've got to find a better way to share this, because it's not for lack necessarily. And the inequality is stark. Like we were just talking about a while ago when we were speaking, is that in South Sudan, I just read today that they less than 1% of the population is vaccinated. In Italy, where I am right now, 85% of the population is vaccinated, and the 15% that aren't are not vaccinated because they don't want to be, and they're rioting. They attacked the Union Hall in Rome the other day, and they shut down the ports today because they are resisting being vaccinated. So these gaps are getting wider, and it's just not sustainable. It's inhumane, and it's just not sustainable. And so what little we can do, at least with music, we can provide a platform, and hope that tips the scales in whatever way slightly in a more positive direction.
Yeah. So what do you think are the different ways in which one can approach your manifesto? I mean, how do we apply it to our daily lives?
Well, I think going back to the question you were asking about listening, I think one of the big changes in listening is just short attention spans. I think we know this. And when I think of streaming, there's two elements to the streaming problem. And one of them is monetary, and the other one is just in terms of how music could survive in this age. So when you think about something like Free Jazz, the album by Ornette Coleman, which is really is the proto-punk record. It's the one that influenced what became to be known as punk. And it's, almost, I think it's 38 minutes long, one piece. Well, that can't happen in streaming. I mean, they would be paid the same amount for that as for a single track. But beyond that, most people they don't have the attention span to listen to a 3-minute pop song. They don't do it usually. Fast forwarding allows that. And, and so now you see the structure is that it's cart before the horse. There's that the format is structuring how the music is made, because they've got to hit you within a couple of seconds. Otherwise, you're going to move on to the next thing. And there's 62,000 songs being uploaded to Spotify a day currently, which is up from 40,000 a year ago. And it's going to be up more in the future, undoubtedly. And it will become infinite to the point that it will be unsearchable. So people, I think, are confused by probability versus possibility. So the possibility is, oh yeah, somebody's going to find this and they're going to fall in love with this band from, Azerbaijan, and that's going to be their thing. Okay, yeah, that could possibly happen. But probabilistically speaking, 90% of the streaming activity is going to 1% of the artists. And we know who those are. They're all affiliated with those 3 big corporations. They're cartoony. They can't fail. They're too big to fail, literally. Adele today put out a new record, and it's everywhere. I don't think there's a news source in the world that you're not going to see a piece about that. And that's not saying that Adele's good or bad. It's just that's the reality. So I think giving our attention to things that are difficult is important. When given the choice between two seemingly equal things, if you're at City Lights and you're looking at 2 books, it's not charity. It's just if you're looking at 2 books and one is written by, a female writer versus a male writer, and you think they both might be good, buy the book by the female writer. I mean, that's all. That's an action towards greater equality. It's simple, really, and it's not charity. It's not this thing that I think a lot of people do now, which is like they like the person without hearing them because they check a lot of boxes. No, it's not that. I mean, a lot of people that check those boxes, their music is very, very inane. So that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about, you could watch a film from a country you've never heard of or know very little about in a language other than English, or you could watch a superhero movie. I think the choice should be clear, and yeah, it might be a little more challenging, but that's what art is for. It's to challenge us emotionally and challenge us neurologically. And, I was coming back on the plane just a couple of weeks ago, and both ways to the US and back, again, probability, there's all these things people could be watching on their screen, but I literally saw only 2 films being watched by every single person in both directions on 4 planes. So somehow they're all, and one of them was a Marvel comic thing, right? That was one of them, and the other one was like a Disney thing. So it's like, all right, well, there you go. There's Disney, there's Marvel Comics. So, and these are adults. These aren't 2-year-olds. These aren't, teenagers. These are august individuals, and then that's what they're watching. So it's like, all right, so we got a lot of content, but how is it being used culturally? And so I think the other thing that we want to do, or ideally would do, is that there's so much content. I think that irony is overused now. It's a way of dealing with content. I'm not against anything. If people want to use irony, that's fine. But I think rather than, dancing goofily on purpose to a song that sucks, maybe just get some music that's actually really heartfelt and spiritually enriching, and support that instead.
Yeah. It's funny, every so often people will ask us, why don't we have a bestseller case at City Lights? And I just point them to our world translation room and say, we were one of the very first outlets on the West Coast that carried African, Asian, Latin American translation. And that project continues to this very day. I mean, so I totally hear you.
Yes.
So what's on the horizon for you coming up? Any new projects that you can actually tell us about?
Well, there is a new Good Ones record coming out, hopefully next year. We, are going to keep trying to do what we're doing for as long as we can. We don't make money on these projects. We lose money there, and we don't have a lot of money. We don't have a trust fund, and business is down like most folks. But I've been fortunate enough to make money teaching violence prevention in the US, and have enough left to go do these projects, and also able to do these projects in a way that it can be done pretty economically, and that's, again, the utility aspect that's so frustrating sometimes, is to see the amount of money that is wasted, with production numbers, like you see these production numbers now, where there was this little window with COVID where people were truly, playing in front of their laptop, and then pretty soon the production started going up, and by August last year, you started seeing literally productions that were on late night television that cost $1 million for a 3-second song. And so that little window where maybe some artists from Ghana might have had a chance that wasn't connected to Universal Music or somebody, that window was very short. It closed very quickly. So we are able and fortunate enough to do these things relatively economically, and for the cost of what a lot of artists would spend on one day in the studio, we can make an entire record from a country that is literally underrepresented or unrepresented in popular music in a language other than English. So we hope to keep doing it. And when I say we, I mean Marlena Hosadeli, my wife, who does the photos and video, and we've done 34 records and counting, and we'll do it for as long as we can. I don't know, but as long as the governments allow us to. I mean, that's the other thing, so yeah. But it's been incredibly uplifting, because almost every time our faith that there is music there has been affirmed. Going places blindly without knowing anybody, and just believing we're gonna find music here, and having our expectations exceeded over and over and over and over again, almost without fail, is one of the most thrilling things I think that I've ever experienced.
Well, listen, I really want to thank you for being with us today. It is always a pleasure to engage with you, always insightful. We wish you the best in your work and safe travels, as we know you travel quite a bit. Yeah. Before we sign off, I would like to remind you all watching that we have posted links in the description of this event where you can purchase copies of Muse-Sick and other books in his back catalog. So really, thank you for joining us. Be safe, be well. We hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, City Lights. Go City Lights.